Jeff, thanks for joining us. Good to see you again.
Thank you for having me.
Yep, and we are streaming this on Facebook Live. Next time we'll do it on LinkedIn Live.
Once we have LinkedIn.
Exactly, we'll definitely do that. We've been talking a lot about AI and jobs, and there's a lot of headlines in less sophisticated newspapers than ours about how AI is going to mean the end of jobs and people are going to be out of work. You're on the front lines of this. When you read these headlines, when you see these predictions, what do you think?
So, as the headlines started to take on greater weight because it was increasingly becoming reality and it was less about the future and less about science fiction, it started to obviously pay closer attention, especially given the relevance to our platform. And once it tipped, once it felt like not just monthly or weekly, but on a daily basis, you would read new stories, new prognostications and forecasts. One of the things that became increasingly apparent was people don't know. No one knows what's going to happen.
Right.
And there have been a lot of definitive forecasts, but the big takeaway for us was rather than try to come up with a definitive answer for something that has so many variables associated with it. Not just the technology, but the sociological implications, the regulatory implications. There's a lot that goes into this. Let's try to leverage, at least in LinkedIn's case, let's try to leverage our platform in such a way where we can help people answer the questions. So we can help people understand how quickly workflows or activities or jobs are susceptible to automation or AI. How quickly jobs are being displaced, how quickly jobs are being created, the skills required to take on the new jobs, the paths that will be required to reskill workers within a given company who have lost one job but now could be prepared to take on a new job, where the skills gaps are most acute on a global basis, what we can do to help people navigate those skills gaps. So that's been one of the major takeaways. But again, every other week it seems there's another directional shift. Bain, did you see the Bain numbers that just came out? So for those that didn't see it within the last week, good report, an interesting report that was talking about not only the rise of AI and automation, but countervailing trends in terms of the aging workforce and the fact that demographically there'll be less labor supply, while with regard to automation, there's greater potential supply because people are being displaced. And then this third variable, socioeconomic stratification, the implications for demand. Again, all of these variables, but they're basically saying that 10 to 20 years following 2020, 20 to 25% of lower and middle skilled jobs will be completely displaced.
Mm-hmm. And then what happens then?
That's the key question. And their point was, once again, you got a lot of different variables and countervailing trends. So this point about socioeconomic stratification was really interesting, and you very rarely see it juxtaposed with the impact of automation or AI. But the point was, you're increasingly going to have all of this investment taking place infrastructurally in terms of creating greater productivity, more innovation, et cetera. But if you've got increasing socioeconomic stratification and you have so many people who typically participate in the economy through their consumption of goods and services who don't have jobs and can't necessarily afford it, demand starts to wane.
Right.
Now you've got oversupply, and the impact on economies and the global economy could be quite severe.
Right. So how do those people who lose their jobs because of AI, what do they do? What's the good movie scenario for them?
Yeah, so I think it starts foundationally. Oftentimes we talk about the rise of AI and the need for AI PhDs and data scientists, et cetera. And trust me, there's tremendous demand for that. And once again, a skills gap, because there's just not enough people in the world with that kind of expertise to meet the growing, seemingly unending demand that has started. But digital literacy and just foundational skills, people who are capable of using spreadsheets and Word docs and able to collaborate through these tools. Just these basic digital skills are increasingly going to be absolutely essential to be able to take advantage of new jobs. Because if you're being displaced by the AI, there are going to be roles within your organization, new jobs that are created by virtue of these new technologies, by virtue of the rise of the digital economy. And if you don't have these very basic skill sets, you're going to have a very difficult time finding yourself taking advantage of these opportunities. So I think it starts with digital literacy and making sure that people have those basic skills. I also think whether it's through companies, governments, or increasingly likely that it's going to be public-private sector cooperation, we need to make very substantial investments in learning and development and getting ahead of these trends and understanding where the jobs are being displaced, where the jobs are being created, and whereas historically that was all prognostication and the forecasts of economists and analysts, we now have this data. This data is available to us. So let's leverage it. And every company's in a position now where they can start to do workforce planning in a far more sophisticated way. So they understand the fastest growing jobs within their organization, the skills required to obtain those jobs, the aggregate skills of the people that they already employ, the size of the gaps between those two supply-demand dynamics. And then do something about it to close the gap. Make sure the coursework is available, make sure the trainers are available. Make sure the company's made a commitment in terms of resources, in terms of time, in terms of managerial cycles to ensure that people have the skills they need to take on the jobs that are and will be, and not just the jobs that once were.
And who's doing that training? Is it the companies? Is it in-house?
I think you're starting to see more and more of that training taking place in-house. I think, thankfully, you're starting to see governments, select governments on a global basis really get ahead of this. Singapore has always been an interesting market by virtue of its scale. And the fact that it has a smaller population where they can really invest proactively, understand these trend lines, and start to do something about it. I think Prime Minister Modi in India is trying to get ahead of some of these trends. In terms of companies, you increasingly do see larger companies ratcheting up their investment in their learning and development budgets and starting to better understand the skills that their workforce needs to take advantage of these opportunities.
And where does that leave four-year colleges and universities? I mean, as you cast forward, if so many companies are doing their own skills training, I mean, is there a little bit of tension between those two institutions, or how do you think about that?
Yeah, I hope it's less a tension and a potential conflict and more cooperation. I mean, I would love nothing more than to see even the most prestigious four-year universities have a deeper understanding of where the jobs are being created.
Right.
And they don't necessarily need to steer their student bases into specific jobs, but to be able to offer the classes and the courses and help people develop the skills necessary to obtain those opportunities, I think would be fantastic. So hopefully we are going to see more cooperation over time. I think it's going to be really important.
Right. And you talk a lot about the economic graph being core to your business model, just so that everybody is on the same page. Could you just explain that to the audience?
Yeah, sure. So we draw a distinction at LinkedIn between vision and mission, where the vision is our dream, it's true north, it's what inspires us, and the mission is an overarching objective that is measurable, realizable, and hopefully inspirational. And our vision is to create economic opportunity for every member of the global workforce. So there's north of 3 billion people in the global workforce, and that's separate and apart, although obviously related to our mission to connect the world's professionals, to make them more productive and successful. And there's about 770, 780 million knowledge workers or professionals in the world. And when you include students and pre-professionals, that's the number. So we've always been very focused on this core, the professional, the knowledge worker, and helping them to connect with others and creating opportunities for them. But about 5+ years ago, we were growing faster than we anticipated in terms of the rate with which we were adding new members. Today, north of 530 million folks have signed up for LinkedIn, fast approaching north of 550 million. And so we started to ask ourselves what would come next, and we started to think about that vision statement and how we would potentially operationalize it. And the way we decided to operationalize the vision is to develop the world's first economic graph. A graph in scientific circles, particularly within a digital realm, is a fancy way of talking about mapping connections and understanding connections between nodes on a network. And it could be people or professionals in our case, it could be friends and family in the case of Facebook, it could be interests in the case of Twitter. And for us, we were always a professional graph, but we started asking ourselves, what would it take to make this vision happen? And so we wanted to create the world's first economic graph. We want to digitally map the global economy across 6 dimensions. And the first dimension is members of the global workforce, those 3 billion plus people I mentioned earlier. We want to have a profile for every one of them now. We'd like there to be a profile for every company in the world. And when you include small and medium-sized businesses, there's between 50, 60, some would say 70 million companies in the world. We want there to be digital representation for every job available at any given time. And there's roughly 20 million jobs that are digitally accessible in terms of available jobs right now. We want there to be a digital representation for every skill required to obtain the jobs offered by those companies, and increasingly not just the skills, but also in terms of the data, what skills you need, but the coursework you need to acquire the skill, and that's why we acquired Lynda. We want there to be a digital profile representation for every higher educational organization, vocational training facility, or university in the world that enables people to acquire those skills. And then lastly, the last dimension, we want to be a publishing platform that enables every individual, every company, every university, anywhere in the world to share their professionally relevant knowledge if they're so inclined. Right. And then we want to allow intellectual capital, working capital, and of course human capital to flow to where it can best be leveraged. And the hope is that we can help lift and transform the global economy as a result.
Right, and that all makes sense, but layer into that, like there's inertia, there's human beings, human behavior. I mean, part of the political backdrop is, you know, a particular industry is going down and people don't want to acknowledge that, right? I mean, we're seeing that. It's part of the political discourse in this country. So as you're thinking about that economic graph, isn't there some friction in the system just because human beings are human beings?
Thankfully, there's a lot less than you might imagine because we seem to all be unified by a desire to create economic opportunity for people, regardless of what country you live in, regardless of what kind of government structure presides there, regardless of your political orientation. People want to see others enjoy economic gain and take advantage of economic opportunity because it benefits everyone within a given society. Right. And so there may be arguments and debates about the best way to go about that. But in our case, we're talking about leveraging data that's already readily accessible via our platform on a global basis within any given locality. And the same people that are having these debates are the same folks that light up when you show them what's possible.
Right, right. But given all the disruption in jobs, I mean, you know, you're talking. Let's say you're talking to a class of graduating, you know, college seniors, and you know, there's still in our society a little bit of talk. You know, the kids are a little. It's like, what do you want to be when you grow up? Like, how many? In your mind, how many different jobs, how many new professions are going to be created over the course of somebody's career?
I think a lot, and I also think the need to consistently re-educate oneself is going to change. You know, we used to live in a time where you would go to skill, you would study a trade or develop an aptitude in a particular area, and you'd be set up with a job for the rest of your life. And by virtue of how quickly things are changing, I no longer think that's the case. I think a lot of people would agree. There's going to be tons of new jobs. I mean, you look at some of the fastest growing jobs anywhere in the country right now. Solar panel installation engineer is one of the fastest growing jobs by many multiples. That job wasn't around a few decades ago. Right. And by virtue of the technology that you've been talking about at the conference today in terms of AI and this ability to automate, you know, high volume, highly repetitious jobs to free people up for the jobs that require a different level of collaboration, creativity, critical reasoning, problem solving. There's going to be countless jobs that are created as a result of these new technologies. Yeah. We've
been talking a lot about the war for talent. There's a supply-demand imbalance of talented AI people. So I want to talk more just about straight-up corporate culture and again, you've sort of had a front row seat on this. What are the patterns for you of companies that are effective at attracting and retaining talent?
I think it starts with understanding and codifying what the organization's about, what they're trying to accomplish, not just what they're trying to accomplish, but how they're trying to accomplish it. And I think that how matters more than ever before. As a matter of fact, I think you can make the argument there was a time where the how really wasn't on the radar of management and leadership. It was all about results, and increasingly, and you can see it right now, you can see it, pick the headline. There's a lot of talk right now about the unintended consequences of this new age we live in, and the new technologies and the innovations and the ability to connect people and the ability to achieve scale at previously unfathomable rates. And so the how matters, it increasingly matters. And I think the companies that are best able to attract the best and brightest talent out there have a very clear sense of what it is that they're trying to accomplish, whether that's mission and or vision. And they have a clear sense of how they're trying to accomplish it, their culture, the collective personality of their organization, and their values, the first principles upon which they make day-to-day decisions. And when the what and the how are aligned with the prospects that you're trying to recruit, you don't even have to sell them on your company. They're going to seek you out because they're paying attention. And you know, today companies are constantly either in the news or sharing what they're up to via social media. And consumers increasingly are consuming that information, regardless of whether or not the company themselves the companies themselves are sharing that information. It's not just about marketing messaging anymore. It's not just about why a product or a service is better or cheaper. It's about what that company's trying to accomplish and how they're trying to accomplish it. And consumers increasingly base decisions on the very same information that employees base those decisions.
Right. Can you tell if somebody's looking for a job?
By virtue of LinkedIn?
Yeah.
I think there's a bit of a myth historically that as soon as someone updates their profile, they're in the market. And there may have been a time when there was some correlation, but as LinkedIn has increasingly become kind of a definitive standard for professional identity and the definitive source, people will update their profile when they've just received a promotion, or when they've added a new skill, or they just got a new patent. They'll update their profile after sharing a new post. And so I don't know that the correlation still holds as strongly, but there's probably a little bit of correlation in there.
So what secret algorithm do you have?
I don't have any secret algorithms, me personally.
Why do people leave jobs? What are the top 3 reasons, and please prioritize them?
I think, you know, there's an old saying, people don't leave jobs or companies, they leave managers. Mm-hmm. And I guess it starts there to some extent. When you're working for someone that you don't feel has your back or your best interest at heart, when they're not coaching you and providing the right kind of mentorship, and that doesn't mean the person themselves does, but providing you access to mentorship. When they're not helping you think through a career path or helping to train and educate you, some of the stuff we were talking about earlier. When they don't share your value system, I think that's a pretty good tell that somebody's not going to be in that role for too long. And in a similar way, you know, one of the highest correlating factors with people leaving a job or a company is not feeling like they have a friend within that organization. A really strong correlating factor in terms of people leaving is when someone they really care about and like leaves the company. Right. And oftentimes if there's not others within that organization that individual feels strongly about, they'll follow suit. I think autonomy is clearly a very significant factor, and in particular with this youngest generation and millennials. I think they're looking for greater autonomy and the space to be able to solve problems once those problems and objectives have been clearly articulated to them. I think recognition, you know, all human beings need recognition, and it comes in different ways to different people. It could be a pat on the back. It could be an expression of gratitude. It could be a promotion and a title. It could be a raise. It could be all of the above. And then I guess last is, when we kind of touched on it, it's just alignment in terms of sense of purpose and what you're trying to accomplish. Mm-hmm. When what the individual is trying to accomplish is perfectly aligned with what the organization is trying to accomplish. Those, if you have these other factors in place, that could be a working relationship that lasts for a really long time. And it's not coincidence, in my opinion, that when you look at the leadership teams, the executive teams of the 5 most valuable companies in the world, and there's others too, it's not just the 5 most valuable, and they're all tech companies, the median tenure of these executive teams is well into double digits. Mm-hmm. These are not folks who've been around for 1, 2, 3 years. They're people that believe so deeply in what the company is trying to accomplish, and the mission of the company is so deeply aligned with what these individuals are trying to accomplish that, in a sense, they feel like it's their company. And when you have that amongst your leadership, and that leadership has a chance to do it year after year together, and they can build trust and they can build shorthand, it makes the decision-making process that much easier when you have that kind of trust. And at the end of the day, the value of a company is really related to the speed and quality of its decision-making. And so I think that alignment in terms of purpose, having the right people together, that's how you create strong, valuable organizations.
And you've been CEO for how long?
It's 9+ years. It'll be 10 years in December.
Okay. So what insight have you had about being a leader, being a CEO, like in the last 2 years, where the sort of dime dropped, and it's like, that's a new insight?
In the last 2 years, that's an interesting angle on that question. I think one of the things that's becoming increasingly clear, and it's the longer I'm in the role, so I think the recency factor is very much a part of the insight, is making sure to cultivate the optimal level of patience. And I didn't say patience, it's optimal level of patience.
Please unpack that.
Yeah, well, there's too much patience, there's like a Goldilocks patience. There's too much patience and there's too little patience. Too much patience, and you're going to make excuses and rationalize how slowly things are evolving. You're going to give people too many chances to get something right that should have been done right previously. And in light of having too much patience and allowing things to move too slowly, the competition in the era we currently live in, the competition is just going to take full advantage of that. And you're not going to get an endless number of shots or at bats. You're just not. Conversely, and this is the real insight, you have to allow certain investments and certain bets the time to grow and for teams to learn and to iterate. And if you get really excited and amped up about a particular initiative and you launch it and it doesn't work, you can't just shutter it and move on to the next thing, which is a natural tendency given the thing I was just describing earlier and the competitive dynamics and how intense it all is and how fast everything's moving. Everyone wants to just move on to the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. But you have to, and this is why I think effective leaders, or where they truly delineate and differentiate themselves, they have the vision and the stubbornness to know it is absolutely the right thing to be investing in. And so they're going to stay with it. And what I'm seeing time and time again is that allowing for that investment to continue and allowing teams to fail and to learn and to keep trying when you know it's the right area, the right thing to invest in, pays off over time. But again, if you just allow it to keep happening over and over again, it passes a certain threshold and becomes diminishing returns.
It's a paradox.
Yeah.
One more question from me, and then we'll go to the audience. We had a conference last year, the Higher Ed Leaders Forum, all university presidents. And one of the themes that we heard from a lot of them is that they were feeling so much pressure to weigh in on social media, not just when something happened within the university or college, but when anything happened in the world, their city, the world at large. And you're the CEO of a social media company. I mean, that's part of what you do. Just thinking, like, how do you decide when to post something or to weigh in on an issue? Because it seems to me like you could be doing it all day long. You've got, what, 8 million followers? You get a lot of likes that way. But how do you decide when to weigh in and do your day job?
Yeah, it's a great question, especially in this political climate. You know, there was a time when CEOs and people at work wouldn't touch these issues
Right.
with a 10-foot pole, and it now feels like, exactly to your point, if you're not saying something, people unfortunately can assume the worst. I mean, so much trust has eroded in our institutions, whether they're governments or companies, that people unfortunately can assume the worst when they don't hear from you.
Right. They fill the void.
Nature abhors a vacuum.
Right.
People are going to project into that vacuum what they believe that you're about, as opposed to you owning that and really expressing yourself. So for me personally, there's a few different ways to think about it. The first is, as the CEO of LinkedIn, how does the event or this thing that is generating discussion, how does it impact our mission statement? To what role in the world do we play that is relevant to this event? Can we help in some way? Are we in a position to do something about it? So alignment with our sense of purpose. The second is our employees. And while there's going to be significant overlap with the alignment with our mission and this event, There's also going to be things taking place in the world that may not be directly related to what it is that we're trying to accomplish, but it's impacting our employees. And it may make our employees feel less safe. And it may make our employees question certain things. And in those situations, to the extent it becomes disruptive, I feel the need to say something, either personally or as a company and a leadership team. And then third is, I'm a person. You know, I may be the CEO of LinkedIn, but I'm also a human being.
Right.
And sometimes I feel the need to say something because it impacts me in the way I think about things. And so you try to strike the right balance between, at least for me, those three variables.
Right. And then you throw in the occasional tweet about the food truck that you've been.
Yeah, there's food trucks, and sporting events, and movies, and music.
That's great. Who's got a question for Jeff? Lorna.
Lorna.
Beat him up, Lorna.
Two questions for you, Jeff. One is, it's been about, I think, 14 months since the acquisition officially closed of Microsoft acquiring LinkedIn. I'm curious in what ways you think you have influenced the way that Microsoft attracts, retains, thinks about talent. And then secondly, it's been even longer than that since you acquired Lynda. And I'm wondering what you think about that, especially when we talk about retraining the global workforce.
Yep. Thank you for those questions, Lorna. Lorna and I used to work together at Yahoo. So with regard to how we may have influenced Microsoft, you know, I think Satya and the leadership team there were already on a different path prior to our acquisition. With regard to Microsoft becoming an even more purpose-driven organization, a more agile organization, a faster organization, some would argue a more innovative organization. And those things, I think, have really made a difference in terms of not only retention, but Microsoft being such an appealing place for a lot of folks to work. Then you factor in emerging technologies like AI, conversational computing, certainly the cloud, and Microsoft's on the bleeding edge, quantum computing, and that has a tendency to attract some of the best and brightest. I think with regard to the addition of LinkedIn, I think given what we're trying to accomplish in the world, I think it helps enhance the way Satya and Microsoft already think about helping people to be more productive and making a positive difference in the lives of their customers. So in that regard, maybe it compounds it a bit, but I think Microsoft is very much on a path where that's moving in the right direction. In terms of our acquisition of Lynda, it comes right back to the economic graph framework. And when I talked about skills, when we had originally laid out this vision for the economic graph and we would hit that pillar for skills, we would talk about it in the context of creating a taxonomy and a database leveraging structured data around tens of thousands of skills. But it's one thing to say, hey, you're looking for this particular job, we know your background, we know what you've done, we know your skills, and there's a gap here, so you should think about how to acquire this skill, and then actually providing the coursework to enable that individual to get the skill. And whether the coursework is developed through Lynda, or whether it's developed through a third party, which I think we're going to increasingly experiment with, we just want to make sure that people can get the skills they need to obtain the jobs that they want.
That's great. We do have a question from Facebook Live. I'll read it out loud. Do you think AI forces people to up their game by doing more training and getting a practical education that allows for deep work? I feel like you've touched on this, but do you want to hum 30 more seconds of music on this?
Yeah, I'd never heard it quite in that context. Does AI really force human beings to up their game? I think in terms of taking advantage of the opportunities being created, yeah, to the point we talked about earlier, whether it's foundational and just improving those basic digital skills and digital fluency, or at the upper end of that continuum with regard to machine learning and data scientists and creating more relevant algorithms, there's going to be a lot of opportunities created by virtue of this technology.
Yeah, that's great. Another question from the room over here. And please introduce yourself.
Thank you. My name is Jocelyn Mangan from Snagajob, and my question is around your optimal patients. So one thing that I've noticed is that technology is changing really fast and people don't really like change. So as you think about your organization and you're inspiring your organization to change, I'm kind of moving away from the Goldilocks patience and more into the speed category. Can you talk about what's worked in terms of motivating your teams and your organization to change as fast as technology or as fast as you think they need to as CEO? Maybe what's worked and what hasn't? Thank you.
Yeah. So with regard to, I think speed and innovation are very closely related. And we have historically framed this in the context of innovation. How can we be more innovative? But it goes back to that point earlier about the value of a company over time, in my opinion, is about the speed and quality of its decision making. So we're also very focused on that. So I think there's a few different things that go into creating the right environment there. I think part of it is making sure you have the right talent. I think you have to cultivate the right culture, and I think you have to have the right infrastructure. So with regard to talent, you want people who are comfortable moving quickly. You want people who are comfortable taking risks. You want an entrepreneurial mindset, and at the same time, in our case, when I joined the company in December of 2008, we had 338 people. Today we have almost 12,000 people. And so the organization's gotten larger. So it's not just about having an entrepreneur's mindset. You also need to understand how to navigate an organization as it grows larger. So that's, with regard to the talent, we keep an eye out for folks like that and to continuously develop our talent along those lines. With regard to culture, you have to make sure you're creating an environment where that mentality can flourish. You could bring the talent in, but if the culture is not a fit, those people are increasingly going to be frustrated. And you see that oftentimes in larger organizations where the most innovative people, the rule breakers, are the most frustrated. And then they leave. And then the people that were counting on them to change things see that they leave and feel like they have no chance, and they leave as well. So you want to make sure, at LinkedIn, we talk about a value like acting like an owner is critical. We talk about taking intelligent risks. It's a codified value for us. So I think culture and values is a big part of it. The third one is arguably the one that gets most easily overlooked. And you can have the talent, you can have the right culture, but if your infrastructure is not built so that people can move quickly, it's not going to work. And years ago, we recognized the mounting tech debt that we were accruing at LinkedIn, which every startup accrues. Virtually every company now accrues. And by tech debt, I'm talking about corners that your organization is cutting so you can continuously just push code as quickly as possible, keep up with the competition, innovate faster, faster, faster. But that initial code base, your initial architecture, your front-end framework decisions, that was originally devised at a time when the company was much smaller and much less complex. And over time, it gets to be so complicated, it becomes potentially prohibitive. And it just comes to a screeching halt if you are not revisiting how you build product, how you develop product. We, several years ago, actually stopped all new product development for an entire quarter. And we re-architected the way we build product. We had been pushing code up until that point. We had slowed down to about once every 6 weeks, and God forbid you missed that train, because the next train was already loaded with the product and services we were going to be launching. So you might have to wait 12 weeks to launch your code. And we actually emerged from that period with a stated objective to allow people to develop and push code in real time without any hesitation, without any latency. And that was the vision, and we made huge improvements several years ago, but within the last year or two, got to the point where when we were developing our new mobile capabilities, we were requiring teams to push code 3 times a day, and for there to be a 3-hour time period from the time it was pushed to the time it was on site. And so it completely changed the game for us, being able to move that quickly.
That's great. We could talk all day. No surprise, great insights, great stories. Thank you very much, Jeff.